Greetings, sire. The desert awaits you.
Humans have always been fascinated by history. We enjoy reading about past conquests of our nations or the great legends about noble warriors and heroic victories. This fascination has turned into many a book, and as the modern age dawned, we began making movies and then TV shows and now video games, all based on our past. There have been hundreds of video games based on history, though I'm willing to bet at least half of them are on World War II. The number of media based on that era is without count. But I think these historical video games offer a view into our past, which you just can't get in movies or TV shows, and I think that they are an amazing learning tool, especially for younger generations. I grew up playing video games, and among the first games I ever played were things like Age of Empires 3, a vaguely historical strategy game set during the colonial and early industrial era of North America. I think no other game genre does history better than strategy. First person can be good if you're willing to get gritty enough, but strategy lets you see the bigger picture. Luckily, there are lots of strategy games based on history, from the much beloved medieval-based Age of Empires 2 to the cult classic era-spanning Rise of Nations, or the realistic World War II battles of Company of Heroes. It was games like these which first piqued my interest in history, an interest that has carried on for many years and is the reason I took this course. The game I will be talking about today is Stronghold Crusaders, a real-time strategy game set roughly around the time of the Third Crusade. It was made by Firefly Studios and released in 2002. I first played this game when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, when my dad gave me his CDs. I never got very far in any of the Stronghold games as a child, but the memory of playing them has always stuck with me. Stronghold Crusaders is a real-time strategy game. The gameplay revolves around managing both your economy and military. Much as in real life, the two go hand in hand, and if you are to ever wage a successful campaign, you must also have a strong economy back home. The game does its best to show the process of creation or gathering for many resources or items. Your lumberjacks don't just hit a tree and the wood magically enters your resource pool. You get to see him go out, chop down the tree, bring back the logs, and turn the logs to planks. And then he brings them to your stockpile. Then, that plank of wood may be picked up by one of your fletchers or pole turners and turned into a bow or spear. And you get to see this with just about every resource, whether it be wheat, iron, or hops. It shows people that there is more at work in a medieval economy, that there is a process to making everything, instead of the typical strategy system where you just put 50 wood and 30 food into a barracks and 10 seconds later an archer pops out. Perhaps most importantly, your economy contributes to the treasury, and as any student of history would know, it costs a lot of money to wage war. Keeping your peasants fed and giving them amenities like alcohol or religion allows you to levy higher taxes, which can give you a certain amount of gold each month based off your total population. Or, if you have the resources to spare, you can sell off your excess resources to drum up a large amounts of gold real quickly. But what good is a strategy game without the fighting? Luckily, Stronghold Crusaders delivers. You have a wide selection of European and Arabic troops to choose from, along with a collection of siege engines. European troops are recruited from the barracks. They require a peasant, a certain amount of gold, along with the weapon they will require. European units require a strong military production economy, which can be quite costly to start, but in the long run, it is cheaper and more reliable. Archer, spearman, crossbowman, maceman, pikeman, swordsman, and knight. The Arabic units are instead recruited from the mercenary post. They require only gold and a peasant. Arabic units range from cheap, weak infantry, which really only serve as cannon fodder, to high-cost soldiers which can outperform their European counterparts, along with specialist units who excel when used in the right situation. Arabian bowman, slave, slinger, assassin, Arabian swordsman, fire thrower, and horse archer. The game also includes many siege engines that can only be built and manned by engineers. You have catapults, battering rams, ballistas, trebuchets, everything that you would need to break down the enemy's walls. The siege units only cost gold to make, but I always thought that they should have had a high wood cost to make it more realistic. During the First Crusade, the siege of Jerusalem was delayed for weeks, all because the Crusaders couldn't find the wood they needed for siege engines. The game is mostly great, but I think it had some missed opportunities which would have helped people better understand the struggle and cost of the Crusades. First, I think the game should have made water a resource much like food. The accounts of the Crusaders often mention their struggle with acquiring even the basic necessities to survive. With little help coming from the Byzantines, they had to rely on being able to loot the supplies they needed. Safe drinking water would add an extra resource that you would have to juggle. I would also add a maintenance cost to your army, so that it's always draining some of your gold to function properly. The Crusades cost a lot. Looking at the accounting book of King Louis IX during his Crusades, you can see that he paid a fortune just on the wages of his soldiers, and even more on ransoming prisoners. The music of Stronghold Crusaders is very fitting for its setting. It uses both Arabic and European-style medieval music, which works well to build atmosphere and immersion. It's a nice touch, as there aren't many games out there that feature an Arabian-inspired soundtrack. As for the rest of the sound design, it's all very pleasant. The game has a good soundscape. Each building produces its own sound when working, whether that be the hammering of a blacksmith or the chiseling of stone of a mason at the quarry. All the sound effects come together to make your castle sound alive. Most of the European units have various English accents, which range from the noble-sounding knight to the chipper archer and the brutish voices of the macemen. While these voices would probably fit the army of King Richard, the game could better reflect the different backgrounds of the Crusaders. Either have the different lords have armies that match their culture, or have the different types of soldiers have different accents, i.e. French with Philip, English with Richard, and German with Frederick. The Arabian mercenaries all speak in their native Arabic languages, with all of them having slightly different pitches and tones to their voices. The most unique voice from the mercenaries would be the assassin who speaks in hushed whispers, fitting his stealthy role. The game lets you choose an Arabian look for your lord, but unfortunately it doesn't change the voice of your other soldiers. The computer-controlled lords that are used in skirmish mode are comprised of both fictional and real historical figures. You of course have big-time players like Richard the Lionheart and Saladin, but you also have leaders like Philip II, and, despite his death early on in the Crusades, Frederick Barbarossa also makes an appearance. There are other lords who are more caricatures of European and Middle Eastern rulers. The Caliph,
Infidel!
the Wolf,
You anger me, you will pay dearly.
the Pig,
Blow the horn, bang the drum, the pig is coming to town.
the Emir,
Time flies when you are having fun. It has certainly flown well today.
all fictional, but they display the ideas of the various types of rulers in the medieval world. The AI build only their culture's unit types. European lords make European units and vice versa, the only exception being the Snake, a fictional lord who uses a bit of both. Richard and Saladin sound and look just about how you'd expect. Richard is loud, proud, and noble.
My men are eager for battle, and so am I. Prepare to fight!
If you've seen any depiction of him in media, you'll know what to expect. Saladin is determined but calm. He never panics or becomes enraged, fitting his title of the Wise.
The desert is no place for you. Go home, my friend. Go home.
Unlike some of the other lords, he never insults you and is always respectful. Philip II is very stereotypical, being incredibly French.
Oh, glorious day! I shall rule over the whole of this fair land.
And Frederick Barbarossa just acts and even plays like a tired old man.
This is madness.
The historical campaigns of Stronghold Crusader cover the First Crusade, Saladin's Reconquest, and the Third Crusade. There is an additional fourth campaign about the Crusader states, but it doesn't include any real history and more just shows off the territorial and economic goals of the lords after the Crusades. The first campaign begins with the Siege of Nicaea. Although it's not much of a siege, you roll into the town, kill a few soldiers, and then you're told to gather some gold. Well, it makes sense for the first mission to help you learn the ropes. It has almost nothing to do with real history. Even the gold-gathering objective doesn't really make sense, as the Crusaders were forbidden by the Byzantines to loot the city, though Emperor Alexis did reward them later to appease them. Next, we stop at Heraclea. The Crusaders' long march has just begun, but they are already running low on food and water. They must contend with constant Arab raiding parties, and you need to gather 300 bread. It's rather uneventful. The most the mission does is acknowledge the struggle of the Crusaders. Following that is the siege and counter-siege of Antioch. You don't actually see the first siege of this city, as it is already captured when you begin, but the game does correctly state that it was captured with help from a spy from within the city. Strangely, the briefing says that Saladin is commanding the enemy army, especially since he won't be born for another 30 years. Next, you must gather ale to boost the morale of the Crusaders besieging Arca. The mission is simple and again doesn't have much bearing on history. With or without your ale, it wouldn't have mattered since the Crusaders were never able to take Arca. It would eventually fall under Christian control, but that would be during the time of the Crusader states. At last, you get to participate in the big finale, the Siege of Jerusalem. You are told that after finally acquiring the wood they needed for siege engines, the Crusaders are ready to take the city. The exact source of this wood seems to be highly debated, as I have read varied accounts on where it came from. The game says that they had to travel several miles to acquire the wood they needed from a forest. A Crusaders account says that it was found by one of their captains suffering from dysentery while he was attempting to find a secluded place to relieve himself. Another account mentions that the wood was salvaged from some Christian fishermen who gave up their boats to help the Crusaders. You have a rather meager amount of men to take the city, but at least it does make sense, as by the time the Crusaders had reached Jerusalem, there was only about 12,000 of them left. Anyhow, using your siege towers, you climb the walls, slay the defenders, and take the holy city. Saladin's campaign is all combat with no economic missions, so it's the quickest of the three to complete. You begin by taking the city of Damascus from a light garrison using your moderately sized army. Next, you go to Kerak to deal with the treacherous Renaud. Despite several truces having been signed, Renaud has continued to plunder the Arabian trade routes that pass near his lands. Your objective is to destroy the church in which Renaud is currently inside, attending the wedding of his stepson. As the game correctly points out, King Baldwin IV has dispatched an army to relieve the defenders of Kerak, so you must move quickly. Using a much smaller force, you must now defeat a large Crusader army at the Horns of Hayton. But you have the advantage that Crusaders are low on food, water, and morale. You pick apart the enemy formations and eventually go in for the kill, eliminating the Crusader leadership and even capturing some holy relics. With that battle, the Crusaders are almost beat, and the only thing left to do is take back Jerusalem. Using your great army, you first eliminate the enemy knights that leave the safety of their castle to meet you on the field of battle. Next, you must eliminate the archers, and then, using your assassins, you must scale the walls and capture the gatehouse, then storm the city. Interestingly, Saladin uses the same wall to breach the city that the Crusaders had done so during the First Crusade. The Third Crusade Campaign Missions. This is where things get serious. The Arabian armies only get more powerful as the campaign goes on, and the majority of missions are defense missions. You start by defending Beauvoir Castle, distracting Saladin's army while preparations are made at Tyr. Then, you defend the city of Tyr, and your objective is to now gather 1,500 units of bread. For some reason. You'd think it might have something to do with holding the port city until reinforcements can arrive, as Tyr was one of the last Christian holdouts after Saladin's conquests. But no, you just gather 1,500 bread while the enemy tries to burn down all your wheat farms repeatedly. Next is the Battle of Iconium. Once again, in an odd choice, this is a defense mission, despite in history the battle was a large fight between the Seljuk Turks and Emperor Barbarossa's imperial troops. In the game, it's just a timed defense mission where you wait for the timer to hit 0 while fending off increasingly larger Arabian assaults. In reality, the Germans won a great victory and plundered the city, greatly alarming Saladin. Unfortunately for the Germans, that alarm would be unnecessary, as Frederick Barbarossa would drown while crossing the River Salif just a month later. Most of the German army then disbanded and prepared to return to Europe. Those few who remained were struck by a terrible disease outside of Antioch, killing many. In an interesting twist, the next mission takes place on Cyprus during one of the strangest campaigns of the Third Crusade. While Richard the Lionheart was crossing the Mediterranean, his fleet was struck by a storm, causing some of his ships to be wrecked on the island of Cyprus. His fiancée also ended up on Cyprus. Luckily, her ship made it to port. However, the self-styled Emperor of Cyprus, Isaac Kaminos, had refused her entry and was essentially keeping her prisoner on her own ship. As what is clearly a reoccurring trend with these missions, you defend a castle from an enemy army. The game wants you to make like 50 swords and 50 sets of armor, though I don't really know why, as the Crusaders weren't exactly lacking in these things. When Richard finally caught up with Isaac, Isaac begged the king not to put him in irons, as he apparently had a phobia of being put in chains, so, in response, Richard had a custom set of silver chains made just for him. Returning to the Middle East, you recapture the city of Jaffa and defend it from the armies of Saladin. With that, the leaders of the crusade must return home due to internal and external issues in Europe. But before he goes, Richard and Saladin sign a treaty that guarantees the passage of pilgrims to Jerusalem. This loosely follows the Third Crusade about as well as you'd expect. Stronghold Crusaders had a great impact on me as a younger kid, and as a teenager, and even as I move into becoming an adult. The building and the battles will always be memorable to me, and based on what I've seen online, there are others who remember the game as fondly as I do. The game might not be the pinnacle of historical accuracy, but I don't think it needs to be. Games like this don't need to give you the total breakdown of the geopolitical situation going on during the Crusades. It just needs to create a certain amount of intrigue that will inspire the player, be they young or old, to go out and read a book on the subject or look it up online. Maybe someday even end up in a class about the subject. I hope this video on a game that is very dear to me has shown you that video games can teach history, or at the very least, inspire someone to teach themselves. There are only going to be more video games as time goes on. They're on the same production and popularity level as movies and TV shows today. But I'll tell you this, I'd much rather have kids these days playing games like Crusaders, where they might learn something, than a mindless shooter like Fortnite or this year's Call of Duty. Thank you for taking the time to watch my video, and have a good day.